The first time I saw the photograph, I mistook the stillness for virtue. 3 figures, arranged with the dignity of a winter portrait. A mother seated, a father standing just behind and to the side, and a child in the mother's lap, small and upright, velvet ribbon at the throat. The cardstock had worn to a feathered edge, the albumin surface crazed like lakes at first thaw. Across a century and more, they held themselves in such stern poise that I, like so many before me, forgot how difficult it is to hold a body perfectly still for the length of a heartbeat, let alone for the span of a photographic exposure that could stretch across the quiet minutes of a room. I noticed the first clue because of a shadow. It is faint behind the mother's right shoulder, a soft arc that doesn't quite belong to the line of her dress. Drag a magnifying loupe across it and the stroke resolves into hardware. A narrow iron stem, its base disappearing behind the chair leg, its head hidden in the slur of shadow under the collar. The Victorians called them pose stands. In 1902, when this plate was fixed, Edward had already taken the throne, but customs rarely obey crowns. Pose stands persisted in studios like this one for a simple reason. Long exposures demanded that the living suspend themselves between breaths. You can see the neck clamp's twin prongs only by their consequence, an unaccountable shadow where it must have caught the light from a high north-facing window. It points not just to the mechanics of a photograph but to the effort behind it, the tranquil lie that stillness is easy. I sit alone in a reading room that smells of cardboard and old gelatin. The wall clock ticks, a restrained metronome, wood and brass, its beat measuring out the distance between me and them. I catalog evidence. The father's cuff bears a black band. The mother's dress is crepe, matted and lightless, the way mourning cloth is meant to drink the sun. There is a jet brooch pinned under her throat, and a ribbon of the same unreflecting beads braided around her wrist, visible where the cuff rides back. The child wears white. The sash at the waist is dark and narrow, and the edges of the collar have been scalloped with an almost festive care. The choices are correct for grief. Children were often dressed in white to suggest innocence, a last assertion that the lost ones were luminous. Listen. The clock ticks. Somewhere beyond the lamp, the darkness of the stacks breathes and shifts with the settling of paper. With my thumb I measure the blur at the mother's hem. None. Her shoes are buttons of shadow, even the lace along the throat lies unbroken. This is not normal stillness. This is a decision to become an object, a thing that negates its own beating. This is labor. When I ask the archive for the studio register, I don't expect there to be a note. But there it is in a spidery hand, MNCH. 1902 funeral sitting. The words are matter-of-fact, the fee noted in pounds and shillings, the extra for retouching paid cash. It is a category. A practice. In those days, if the family missed the living portrait, they sometimes went after. Undertakers knew to leave a few hours grace, to turn the face to the light, to thread a wire under the clothes if the back would not hold. Photographers kept greetings polite and their hands steady. They knew their work asked for reverence and deception. They rouged the cheeks in pigment no one would name, and if the eyes refused to carry a shine, they painted in a dot for the light that would never touch them again. When the plate was developed, a child could look almost awake. It is not gore that troubles me, it is courtesy. The photo does not announce itself as a post-mortem. It whispers if it speaks at all. I tilt the card and the light skates across the varnish. In the child's irises there are bright flecks a shade too keen for the ambient light of the room. The pupils are too round. If you have handled enough plates from that period, God forgive me if you've handled enough infants, you learn the difference between a wet shine and a painted one. It is not in the highlight but in the way the surrounding darkness refuses to answer it. Alive eyes shift the world, painted eyes hoard it. I close my own eyes and listen. Tick, tock. The sound is not quite from the wall anymore. It has found its way into the photograph, steady as a heart not beating. He was 5 perhaps. 4. The birth register is smudged. The death register is cleaner. The vicar's hand is hard to misread. See male child fever. No mention of infection. No note of the rash that might have told me measles, nor the tight lungs of a winter bronchitis. Just fever. The year is a tidy ledger. The studio was on the high street. The men who ran it printed their names in gilt on the back of each card, flanked by laurels embossed into pasteboard, a pantomime of laurels awarded to no one. I trace the address in an old directory and find the facade on a broken plate. Frosted glass, leaded panes, a painted sign. If I lean in, I can smell the memory of magnesium flash powder even though by 1902 the dry plates were good enough they could do without it when the day was clear. They have propped the louvers of the skylight to let November's light in without letting November's weather. There is a stove in the back unlit. The room holds its breath. Here is what the day must have been like. Please don't confuse reconstruction with invention. The bones of this session are written into the angle of a collar and the way a hand falls. The mother comes in first. She is exhausted in a way that refuses pardon. The exhaustion is not sleep's domain. It is the kind that gnaws at the base of the skull and takes laughter away like it was never promised. Her sister is with her, or perhaps an aunt. The child comes wrapped in a shawl that once belonged to someone else and doesn't quite know whose warmth it is supposed to bear anymore. The father holds the door like a man holds a question. He has shaved and could weep from it. The photographer steps forward and becomes a voice without edges. He tells them it will be quick, which is the gentlest lie in his repertoire, and he gestures to the chair with a hand whose nails are dark from silver baths. After I confirm the existence of funeral sitting and other entries, I turn the card over. There, in pencil, signed much later, decades later, judging by the way the letters lean and tire, someone has written a name that brushes my childhood like a cold hand. It is a rare initial in my family, a habit of naming that skipped branches but not stories. I say it aloud. The room watches me steadily. There is a noise like a shutter catching. If you've never heard a mechanical shutter in a quiet place, imagine a held breath that frees itself in a single thought and becomes again a held breath. The sound is not loud. It is precise. It is located. And it is behind me, though the nearest camera is a century behind me too, a glass-eyed contraption in a display case whose bellows rotted to soot long ago. I begin to narrate into a recorder because it helps me make rules the way people light candles when power fails. In 1902, exposures were often short enough to measure in seconds. Not minutes, but seconds stretch when grief is in the room. I can imagine the photographer saying, "We'll have to hold it just a bit for him to come clear," and no one reminding him that him can no longer consent to anything. I can hear the click of the carriage clock on the studio mantel marking out 8 counts. They would do that sometimes, count aloud so that you could give the body something to lean into other than tremor. And I can see the iron of the pose stand rolled behind the chair. The assistant, the wife perhaps if this is a family business, it often was, slides the clamp up along the rod, pads it with a folded scrap of felt, and rests it against the nape of the mother's neck, just below the damp dark of hair coiled too tightly to be comfortable. It steadies her. It does not hold her upright. She was upright before she came in. It takes the humming out of the muscles that have not forgiven her for what they carried and what they could not keep. When I stop the recorder, the room is too quiet. It is an animal sort of quiet, textured with attention. I study the hands. The mother's left hand rests not on the child, but beside him, fingers lying in a line that is almost deliberate. The right hand cups near the child's forearm without touching, a millimeter of air between them. Hands that hover that way in photographs from this era are a kind of grammar. The absence of pressure acknowledges the fragility of fabric and will, signifying both care and boundary. The child's fingers, by contrast, have arranged themselves into surrender. The index and middle fingers fall straight, the ring finger curls a little, the little finger hides. If a living child dozes upright, the weight of his head pulls the body sideways and the parent adjusts. But this child is a line balanced on another line. The spine is too true. In another photograph from another family, a tiny wire emerges against a cuff where the retoucher missed it. Here, if there is wire, it is clever enough to keep to the seams. When I speak this out loud, the whistle in the heating vents modulates. No, not the vents. The whisper is lower than that and older. It moves like a breath traveling along the weave of curtains. I look at the door and know, without deciding to, that I am not alone with this cast of paper and silver. There is presence the way there is rain in the air before you can smell it. Imagine the moment the shutter opened. They would have used a pneumatic bulb, perhaps, to trigger it if they were delicate. The photographer would have said, "Now," and the room would have sealed. The father sets his jaw, his hand on the back of the chair, not quite touching his wife's shoulder. He refuses to blink. He thinks of nothing at all. That is his gift to her. The mother allows the metal at her neck to become a friend for 3 beats. She reduces herself to a portrait. She imagines that if she can become image enough, there will remain a place in the world where he still sits upon her knee and all the clocks around him have been persuaded to slow. The child does not move. Beyond the frame, the aunt grips the shawl to her chest and prays without address. The photographer squeezes the bulb, and the shutter opens in a movement slight as a sigh. And then, because grief is a current broader than our language for it, there is the faintest of motions inside this photograph that no one has ever owned. It is not a trick of light. It is what happens when concentration collects so cleanly in a place that future time knows where to go to find it again. If you've watched old films, you know the tremble of frame against frame that belongs to the medium. This is not that. This is the ribbon at the child's neck lifting and laying itself down, as if the air sighed once, and once was enough to be forever. The ethics of this are not an assignment, they are a haunting. If I publish this, if I tell you this now, do I make their dignity into spectacle? The file folder says the negative is lost. Only the card remains, a single print. But prints can be haunted by the expectation of more. I place the card on the felt square I use as a staging ground and draw a pencil tracing on acid-free paper, a poor man's halo. I should be calm. I am an adult, a professional, a skeptical narrator. I have never claimed to be a skeptic about grief. We return to the studio. The photographer clears his throat in the pause after the shutter slips shut. It is the gentlest sound in the room and it is still too much. We'll take another, I think, he says softly, the ritual preserving him. He has thought of every place he cannot touch. He cannot adjust the child's chin. He cannot lift the hand and tuck it against the lace at the waist. He can risk a little with the ribbon, perhaps, and he does. Just 2 fingers to smooth it against the small white throat. Later, when I zoom the scan to the pixel's brink, I will see that the ribbon lies slightly askew, a shy triangle of darker velvet peeking over the left side like the ghost of a bow. Now, he says again, and the click is a needle slipping through. On the far wall, the mantel clock says tick. The syllables stack up like a soft warning. Old photographs sometimes carry fingerprints in their emulsion, ghost swirls where someone lifted them with a thumb damp with whatever was near. This card carries none. It has been carried like a relic. The parents' faces are not blanketing, they are in the act of turning into memorials. The mother's mouth holds what little she has not given to silence. The father is a straight-backed refusal. The child's gaze, painted or caught, is forward but a degree above level, the way some painters used to place their sitters staring not at the viewer but at the thought of heaven. The effect is disquieting if you notice it. Once noticed, it is undeniable. The census comes to me as a photocopy. The enumerator's hand is careful and impatient. Names, ages, occupations, the tally of children born alive and those still living. In the margin of 1911, the mother's figure is -1. The line of recorded children count as if stones were beads. Then there is the oddity, a note pinned to the back of the card in a cracked envelope that is not from the studio at all but from my own grandmother's box. A coincidence I fail to believe because it isn't one. It says, for L, from H, keep safe. The loops are my family's loops. H, and M, and CH. I thought the H belonged to the father, it may belong to the mother, or to the aunt. It belongs to the blood that leads to me. I had always assumed my fear of clocks was simply nausea at measurement. Now the beat folds over itself like wet fabric and comes again. You must understand this is not theatrical. There is no sudden cold. There is a shift of weight in the room, as if a person has decided to stand behind my chair and admire my patience. I tell myself it is the building adjusting to weather. The whisper that answers is not language and then, very softly, it becomes language. It says, hold still, in a woman's voice and for 4 counts I do. It is easier to give you the material than the miracles. Here is the scrape along the baseboard in the photograph where the chair leg had stolen paint and the retoucher didn't bother to hide it. Here is the misalignment between the father's stance and the line of the rug's pattern near his feet, which tells me that they nudged the camera between takes, not the people. Here is the way the mother's veil, which she has not let fall fully, reflects nothing, exhausting the light where it touches her shoulder. Here is the lip of the child's ear, too pale by a shade, the blood gone early while the face looked yet full. Here is the stiffness in the wrist. Death does not make us all stiff in the same way, sometimes the next day softens what the first hour hardened. Yet these hands read as a story written while the ink was still wet. I have a place in my head for anger and a place for tenderness, and they are next door to one another. When I think about the photographer, both light up. He is careful. He is complicit. He dignifies. He deceives. He sells the truth and the mercy. When he unrolls the pose stand, it is not to shame her. It is to lend her her own spine for the minutes beyond what she has left to give. And here is where my first assumption falters. I had believed the stand was evidence of a dead woman propped up, the old rumor that grew into a macabre myth about Victorians bolting their dead to iron. It was always less dramatic than that and more human. The dead could be posed by cloth and artifice. The living needed help standing in the presence of what had undone them. The hidden stand behind her neck anchors the living. The child is held by gentler lies, fabric, hands, the dignified illusion of uprightness. The most careful touches leave the fewest marks. When I say this into the recorder, I hear in the empty room a click that isn't the recorder cycling to a new file. The sound is the exact timbre of a shutter in a wooden-bodied camera. It is behind the photograph and a degree to the left, the place where the assistant would have stood to judge if a chin needed a breath of lift. I lean forward and the hair along my arms wakes. I'm not afraid of hauntings in the sense you may think. I am afraid of the tiny pieces of truth I have missed and the ghosts of them that insist on being found, tapping politely on the glass. There is a myth that if you stare long enough at a photograph, it will eventually blink. It is not a myth. It only requires that the photograph contain within it enough carefully held breath and that you agree, deeply and without bargaining, to see what is not quite there. The child's pupils do not constrict, because light cannot change them. The highlight does not shift. What moves is more subtle than twitch or tremor, the sense of focus. For a second the gaze acknowledges me where I am. It could be a trick of my own eye, a micro-movement I export to the picture. It could be the accumulated attention of 100 years of people who have loved and hated and wondered and prayed in front of small lying truths like this. It could be him. The temptation is strong to let the story end in marvels. That would trap them here permanently and me with them and maybe you. But the photograph is not a door, it is a window. Something moves outside it too. Outside the frame in that studio in 1902 the ant shifts her weight. She is the one who brings hartshorn, ammonia, to the mother's nose when the second exposure ends so that the iron pressing at her nape doesn't become a cliff edge. The mother flinches, then steadies, and the assistant unfastens the clamp and leads it away like a skittish animal. The father says nothing. When the photographer removes the plate and slides in another, the light changes a fraction as the louver stutters in a breeze. A barely audible sound travels across the room. It is a small sound, the sound a dress makes when unmoving, which is to say almost none. But it is not nothing and it waves across the curtain like a memory. You have a right to ask what all this is to do with me. I had a fever when I was 5 that lapped at my edges and passed me by. No one spoke about the one before me who did not outrun his. My grandmother made tea and would not leave the kitchen on certain evenings, and some nights I heard the clock tick one tone lower than it ought to. These things did not add up to a story until I found this card. Now they add up to a demand. The demand asks me to know something and then decide something. It is not enough to put the photograph back into its sleeve and leave the lights on in the reading room so it is not alone. It is not enough to mute the recorder and hide it from the night. The picture does not want to be exposed or buried, it wants to be decided. I take it home. You will scold me for this and be right too. There are procedures. There are checks and logs and locks. I have not stolen it. I have borrowed it beyond permission for an evening under the supervision of a fine, dangerous idea. That proximity reveals. The house holds me lightly. The hall encloses the sound of my steps. There is a tiny click near the front door when the latch settles. The photograph lies on the kitchen table in the circle of a lamp that spills light the color of tea. It looks smaller here. It looks more able to be lost. And even now it resists being only fear. It is still a picture of a small family spending the last light of a long day trying to be the kind of quiet that lasts. By now, the movement inside it is no longer something I doubt and chastise. It is part of the rule of this object. If I look directly at the child's mouth, I see the ribbon lift. If I look at the mother's hand, I see the faintest suggestion that the index finger has decided, in a charitable universe, to shift that tiny degree that would make her touch. If I look at the father's cuff, the black band seems to absorb more light than it has a right to take. And if I look at the shadow behind the mother's shoulder, if I look at the ghost of iron, I feel the ache in my own neck ease as if something has agreed to lend me its quiet. I'm not romantic about this. I'm too old to believe that old things deserve honor just for surviving. But a funeral sitting is not just a picture. It is the last motion translated into the firm language of stillness. It is compromise. It is intrusion. It is permission. It is the whole human mess condensed into a rectangle you can hide in a book. I begin to understand the shape of my choice. I can destroy this object. To do so would be to intervene in a haunting by releasing its vessel, and perhaps I would be kinder than I have ever been. Or I can consecrate it. To do so would be to create a context in which it cannot be consumed thoughtlessly again, to declare it a relic and not content. The difference between ghost story and prayer is the audience. The house clock ticks. I have not had a house clock until now. The sound has followed me home not because I am suggestible but because the mechanism for hearing it has been tuned. There is a second sound, a counterpoint. It is the shutter and it is inside my chest and every time it falls, a memory maps itself onto my bones. I step away from the table. I find a match. I will not pretend my hand does not shake. The sulfur sighs awake with a smell like the past caught fire. I hold the match over the card. The fear that runs through me is not fear of flames. It is fear of badness, the shabby private badness of choosing wrong. If I burn it, I end the possibility of this presence finding a host outside my head, and perhaps I end a cruel little carnival of spectatorship. If I burn it, I will also prohibit the future mercy this image might one day do for another who thinks they are alone in their grief, a person who might need to know that even in 1902, the living leaned into iron to keep from falling. If I consecrate it, I risk making a shrine you can visit with a like and a scroll and a smirk. If I consecrate it, I promise to steward it, which is heavier than carrying. I'm not good at carrying. The match gutters, and when it fails, the room clears its throat in the click of a shutter. I do not decide alone. I called this story earlier a demand. It is also a collaboration. The mother is not speaking exactly, but she is nearer now than the lamp is. The father goes on standing. The child not sees me. I say because I must, tell me, and there is an answer disguised as a habit. I hear very plainly 8 soft counts. The old studio counted like that to hold them still. Now the count holds me. At 4 I am crying. At 6 I am ashamed. At 8 I know. I consecrate it. The ritual is mine to invent. I have no priesthood and no rubric. I begin where I always do, with a pencil and paper. I write what I have learned in slow script. I name them as far as I can, and where the names fall away into initials and habits, I let affection stand in. I place the tracing I made beneath the card, a ghost of the shape it is, and I sew them together at the corners with black thread, the stitches small and neat. I cut a strip of velvet from the old ribbon that fell from my grandmother's sewing basket and lay it across the bottom edge like a sash. I speak aloud the facts of the day of the sitting. The weather, the window light, the long exposure, the neck clamp and its shadow, the painted glint in dead eyes, the living mother braced by iron, the dead child steadied by cloth and intention. I say, this image is not a secret, not a spectacle, and not mine. It is to be kept, not shown. It will live in the dark, and when it comes to light, it will be because someone who needs it asked. The house listens. The whisper that used to sound like breath across a curtain now carries words that dissolve as soon as they form, the way tears fuzz the edges of letters. I feel relief that is not just mine. I am not foolish enough to think I have solved the ethics. I have embodied them in an object that decides how it will move through the world. I wrap the card in paper and an old handkerchief that used to be my grandfather's and tie it with twine that lived once around a sheaf of letters. I place it in a box that held a Bible until the Bible crumbled. I close it. I lay my hand on the lid and count, because it has become the way to mark pauses. The next day I return to the archive. I speak with the manager. I tell them I have found a way to catalog this that honors its category. I ask for a notation, restricted access, viewable upon request with supervision, contextual statement required. It is an ask more than a demand. It is a consecration more than a donation. They look at me with the clear patience of people to whom paper is blood. They say warmly yes. The photograph returns to its quiet. It is not sleeping. It is residing. The clock on the wall of the reading room ticks with all the confidence of a thing with weight and spring. The shutter sound, which I almost solved by moving the old camera across the room to a different case, by silencing the place that memory loved to inhabit, is not solved. It should be. It is not. It saves me sometimes now, the way rhythm saves a drowning swimmer when they remember a song. Tick, click, tick tick. I lift my head. I keep working. When I make this video, when I tell you what I have told you, I will not show you the photograph. That is the price I pay for having looked long enough to be seen. What I will show you is a drawing of the pose stand, and how the neck clamp's prongs cast a stray shadow that might never have been noticed if not for love. I will show you a reproduction of a mourning brooch carved from jet, and a silhouette of a hand that could be any mother's hand. I will let you listen to a clock. I will let you hear a shudder. I will let the whispers do what they do best, which is not to frighten, but to insist. Do not think the haunting has left me. Things like this learn your name and hum it into the corners of your life. When a night closes in, I hear the count and I give it back, a call and response that is more lullaby than liturgy. The ribbon at the child's throat sometimes lifts in a dream and lies back down. The shadow of iron leans gently against me when I have gone longer than I can bear. The ethical dilemma did not vanish when I tied the string. It stands beside me and corrects my posture when I forget that all work with the dead is work with the living, and all work with images is work with mirrors. There is a final thing you should know. After I left the card at the archive, I went to the churchyard where the register said he lay. The stone is soft and leans into the grass as if tired of names. I said to the ground, because it steadied me, that I knew his face now, and his mother's and his father's, and that I had promised to take care of their stillness so that it would not be cheapened further. The wind moved without malice. Somewhere in a house near the fence, a clock struck a series of dull, beautiful notes. For a heartbeat I heard a shudder. Or perhaps it was a bird, its wings slicing the air like a thought coming clean. The sound did not frighten me. It taught me how to say goodbye without loosening my hold. If you are here at the end, listening with me, and if you want more stories that treat the past as a place we can enter with our lights low and our questions honest, subscribe for more. There is room for you at this table where we hold what we find and decide how to keep it.